Welcome to Tales from the Grave. Please allow me to guide you through the darkest corners of the human soul. It is said that stories create the world we live in. What world would you have? Let us begin.
The Lady of the Orchard. The rain had already started by the time the coffin was lowered into the ground. Not a storm, not even a proper downpour, but a soft, steady drizzle, as though the heavens themselves wept reluctantly. It slicked the black veils of the mourners and made the polished wood of Elizabeth Harrington's coffin gleam faintly under the leaden sky. The Harringtons were the wealthiest family for miles, and her funeral matched the reputation. Horse-drawn carriages lined the gravel drive, silver handles glinted on umbrellas, and the grave itself was marked with an angel carved in marble, wings spread wide to guard her eternal rest. Charles Harrington stood beside the grave, his gloved hand pressed against his chest, his expression that of a man shattered by grief. He shook the vicar's hand, received condolences with practiced solemnity, and even managed a well-timed crack in his voice when he whispered, "She was my heart, my very heart." And yet, under the veil of mourning, his lips twitched at the corner, a curl of satisfaction. For Elizabeth's death had been no cruel accident of nature, no heart failure, as the doctor signed. It had been carefully measured. Arsenic, ground fine and stirred gently into her evening tea, the bitter tang masked by sugar, swallowed without suspicion. He had killed her himself, and no one suspected. That night, the manor sat quiet, its windows dark except for a faint golden glow in Charles's study. He sat with brandy in hand, savoring not only the liquor, but the freedom it represented. Elizabeth was kind, yes, but watchful, intelligent, far too observant of his late nights, his whispered letters, his clandestine meetings with Clarissa Vale. Clarissa, with her warm skin and eager laughter, Clarissa who did not question. Elizabeth had been a weight, a shadow he could not escape, until now. Yet even as he raised the glass in silent toast to his mistress and his future, a sound brushed against the silence, whispering. So faint he thought at first it was the wind sifting through the cracks of the old house, but the words were too deliberate, too rhythmic, a murmur rising and falling, like a prayer spoken through teeth. He went to the window and leaned into the night air. Beyond the manicured gardens, the Harrington orchard stretched wide, dark trees twisted against the moonlight, and from that direction, carried on the damp breeze, the whispers seemed to seep in. Charles closed the window sharply. He told himself it was fatigue, the mind's trick in grief's wake, but he did not sleep soundly. The orchard had belonged to Elizabeth in a way Charles never understood. Acres of gnarled apple trees planted by her ancestors, their branches perpetually heavy, their roots so tangled it was said they fed on more than mere soil. Elizabeth would wander there each morning, skirts trailing dew, her pale fingers brushing bark as though she were listening to the trees breathe. The villagers had their stories, of course. They always did. Her grandmother had been whispered about as a witch, a woman who healed fevers with poultices that smelled of ash, who cursed a man that struck her cow so his teeth fell out one by one. Elizabeth herself had been too refined for gossip, too elegant, too poised, and yet there had always been something otherworldly in the way she looked at those trees. Perhaps that's why, in her will, she left the orchard untouched. Her ashes, the document declared, were to be scattered beneath the oldest tree, its roots wrapped around the bones of generations. The orchard was not to be sold, nor cut down, nor altered. Charles had rolled his eyes at the sentimentality of it, but the clause was ironclad. And so her ashes rested beneath that ancient tree, even as Charles vowed never to step foot in it again.
If you are enjoying Tales from the Grave, please be sure to like and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories. And now, we return to the Lady of the Orchard.
The weeks that followed carried an uneasy rhythm. Charles and Clarissa settled into the manor, their affair no longer hidden. Yet every evening, as the sun dipped and shadows crept long across the floorboards, he would hear them, the whispers. At first they were indistinct, a sighing chorus he could almost ignore. But soon they sharpened into syllables, like a language older than any sermon he'd heard in church. Sometimes he would jolt awake in the night to find apple blossoms scattered across his pillow, though the orchard was frozen solid with winter. And sometimes he dreamed. Always the same dream. He walked barefoot into the orchard, the moon smearing silver across the grass. The trees loomed taller than they ever had in life, their trunks warping into faces, their branches clawing the sky. The air stank of overripe apples, sickly sweet. And there, at the base of the oldest tree, stood Elizabeth. Her burial gown was soaked as though she had risen from the ground itself. Her skin glowed pale, her hair coiled in wet strands, her lips smiling too wide. But it was her eyes that froze him, bottomless, black, like open graves. "Charles," she whispered, the voice tender as a lover's. "Charles." He would wake drenched in sweat, his chest aching as though someone had pressed down on it with both hands. One evening, while staring into the fire, he heard the whispers more clearly than ever before. Not murmurs, not sighs, words. "Dig!" The syllable throbbed against his skull. "Dig!" Charles tried to resist. He drowned himself in brandy. He pulled Clarissa close, seeking warmth, distraction, her perfumed skin. But the word burrowed deeper each night, until at last he could not bear it. Lantern in hand, shovel over his shoulder, he crept into the orchard under a moon veiled by cloud. The trees seemed to shift as he passed, their branches groaning. At the base of the oldest tree, the one that held Elizabeth's ashes, he pressed the spade into the earth. The soil was damp, unnaturally warm. The deeper he dug, the more it stank of rot and iron. Roots squirmed up like pale worms, curling around the shovel, resisting him. He hacked and pried until, with a jarring clang, the spade struck wood. Not a coffin, a chest. His breath caught. With trembling fingers he pried it open. Inside lay objects wrapped in crumbling velvet. His own cufflinks, a scrap of Clarissa's silk gown, his cravat pin, and at the center a wax figure crudely molded in his likeness, bound with black thread and stabbed through the chest with a thorn. The lantern sputtered. From behind him came her voice, low, intimate, chilling. "Do you feel it yet?" Pain lanced through his ribs. He dropped the shovel, clutching his chest as though invisible hands squeezed his heart. The orchard moaned with life, branches creaking, roots shifting. And out of the shadows she came, Elizabeth. Her burial gown dragging mud, her hands as pale as bone, her lips curling in something between a smile and a snarl. but it was her eyes that froze him. Hollow, endless. "I took your life," she said, her voice a harmony of whispers, as though the trees themselves echoed her. "Now I will take yours slowly." Roots erupted from the ground, slick and strong, coiling around his ankles, his wrists, his throat. He screamed as bone splintered. The earth opened like a mouth, dragging him down inch by inch. His last sight was her face hovering above, tender, adoring, monstrous. And his last breath tasted of rotting apples. When morning came, the orchard was still. Only the ground at the base of the oldest tree looked freshly turned, damp as though watered by blood. Clarissa inherited everything, though she did not sleep as soundly as before. Sometimes, at night, she would wake to the sound of Charles calling her name, not from the manor, but from the orchard, soft and pleading. She dared not go. The following spring, the apples on the oldest tree were redder than any had ever seen. Glossy, luminous, tempting. Villagers said they were the sweetest they'd ever tasted. Those who bit into them who had pure hearts were gifted with the sweetest dreams, love's eternal embrace. But those who held evil in their soul, who had bad intentions toward others, were stricken with nightmares eternal, always of root and soil.
Thank you for being here. Please be sure to leave us a comment. Let us know where you're listening from. Until we meet again, stay spooky, and may all your nightmares be groovy.